Hello, it's September 14th, 2022. I'm Nancy Groce. I'm with the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress, and I'm here with my colleague Jessie Hocking, who is an archivist, and we're here with the Kitchen Sisters. And I would like to welcome Davia Nelson and Nikki Silva, who have come from California to tell us a bit about their collection, which we're delighted to be welcoming into the library's archive. And I'll have them just say a little bit about themselves first, and then we'll go into talking about their careers as interviewers and documentarians. So can we start maybe with where you're both from and how you met each other?
Sure. I'm Nikki, and I'm from Oakland, California, and grew up in Oakland and went to school in Santa Cruz at UCSC. And Davia went to UCSC as well, but we didn't know each other while we were in school. We met after school.
And about when was this? What years were these?
We just looked this up, and it's 1977 is when we met. I'm not sure of the exact date, but it was before May, I think. Anyway, so I was working at the Natural History Museum in Santa Cruz. I was doing a arts and history program, doing exhibits, fresh out of college. And I was interviewing a lot of older people, and I was very interested in gathering artifacts and historical material. And Davia was doing radio at the non-commercial station, the community radio station, KUSP in Santa Cruz. And our town was really changing because the university had just come a few years before, and it was a sleepy retirement area with lots of older people and a very staid lifestyle. And when the university arrived, it really shook things up, and there was a lot of town gown issue. And we were looking about and seeing all of these ways of life disappearing: ranching, rodeo, fishing, some forms of agriculture. And as things changed, these stories were being lost. And both of us were very interested in storytelling. Davia, we heard about each other, or Davia, I was out looking for people. She was out looking for people to interview. She was very interested in oral history and documenting that. And people kept saying, you really should meet each other. These two, this person was just here, and she's doing the same kind of work. So Davia called the museum one day, and the museum is right above Seabright Beach overlooking the Monterey Bay. It's beautiful. And Davia came at about 2 p.m, and we were sitting on the porch outside, and I think she left at about 8 o'clock that night. So we sort of fell in love at that moment and wanted to do something together, wanted to do a project. We didn't know what it was, but wanted to work together.
Mm-hmm. And Davia, you're also from California?
Yeah, I grew up in LA. And got obsessed as a girl growing up in LA with music and radio and DJs. And it just became my obsession and my passion really early on. And I remember in high school writing my career notebook. I either wanted to be a disc jockey or the first woman on the Supreme Court. Those were my two goals in life. Music and justice sort of always seemed to be there. And I went to UC Santa Cruz. It was, as Nikki says, really the experimental university in the system, the new one. And it was the middle of the Vietnam War and a really contentious time. And I started in and I thought, okay, well, I've got to do pre-law and get ready for my career on the Supreme Court. And kind of quickly veered off into the campus radio station. There were great classes on American music that I started taking, and majored in politics, and it all kind of started collecting into radio documentary and some of the first women's radio shows that were just starting to happen in the 70s. And then by the time I graduated from college, I cannot remember how I got a cassette recorder and how I bought this 25-foot mic cord and how I got a microphone, but somehow I did. And I just started I stayed in Santa Cruz and started walking the town and listening for, as Nikki said, older people who, because there had been such, like everywhere in America, there was, students were demonstrating and towns often were resisting that anti-war sound, and it was sad to me during college to see such a divided place, and the students were so new to this traditional town. And anyway, so I started looking for people to talk to, and I would just go there and do interviews. I don't know why people said yes, but somehow they did. And I was now having what was the precursor to the Kitchen Sisters, a radio show, an old people's radio show on the community station. And so often when I would finish the interview, the elder I was talking to would say, "Do you know Nikki Silva? She was here 2 days ago collecting my baskets." Or, someone else, "Do you know Nikki Silva? She was just here getting my paintings." And I kept hearing this name. And then I fell in love with this guy, and he said to me, "Do you know Nikki Silva? She's doing the same thing you are, but over at the museum." And suddenly it was like critical mass, and led to the infamous phone call and us meeting and sort of joining forces and beginning to walk the land with 2 microphones.
Do you remember what your first project was together?
I mean, there were many projects, but the first one we went on an official interview. Nikki knew so much about local history and the people who kind of made up the lifeblood of Santa Cruz. And there was a man named Bryant, and he had a big array of greenhouses, and they were being sold and taken down, and he was blind. And we went to do the interview with him with the 25-foot mic cord and all of it. And we always say we were so thankful that he was blind, because we dropped the microphone so many times. We were just shivering, shattering with nerves, and he couldn't see. The mic was down on the ground. He did not see our nervousness. So it was a blessing. And ultimately, Nikki lives on a commune in Santa Cruz, and much of that commune, or some of that, I don't know what percentage, was built from some of his greenhouses that were repurposed and recycled. I think she has a big series of trusses from the old Greyhound bus barn, too. Sort of, the stories turned into architecture at a certain point.
And how did you transition from doing these interviews to, were they going on radio immediately, or were you editing them, or how did you kind of develop sort of a package that you could translate fieldwork into stories for the public?
Well, when we began, we were doing these epic oral history style interviews with people. I mean, they were hours and hours. We'd spend days. We'd go back 2 and 3 times. And we were doing this live radio show, and we quickly realized nobody wanted to listen to 5 hours of actual
including us.
Including us, tape. But we really wanted to distill it, turn it into this listenable thing, and we didn't know how to edit, and no one at our station was really editing at that time, so we taught ourselves to edit with a razor blade, and this
so
was
you're doing reel to reel?
We went from cassette to reel, and we were...
we call it the analog
from
years.
The analog years, we miss them, with razor blades and tape, and then we had several tape recorders in this little studio at the station, and we would put different tape on different machines, some cassettes, some reel-to-reels, and there was a mixing board, and we sort of trained ourselves to do that. A lot of experimentation. In fact, one of our sort of signature sounds that we came up with was totally by accident with this piece we did about Tupperware. We had chronicled a number of Tupperware parties in our area. We even had one ourselves just to kind of get the feel of it. And it was, they were so full of joy and plastic bowls and, lots of cheering and happiness. And at one point we went to a rally in Salinas, and they were singing and doing their, rallying their troops to go out and sell Tupperware. And we had all this sound on all these recorders, and we were mixing by just putting them together and turning the knobs, and suddenly everything was up at once, And it was fantastic. I mean, it just sounded like Tupperware. It was all of the bowls and all of the glitter and all of the prizes kind of coming together in one place. And that was it. And about the 56th try, you know, we didn't get it right at first, but.
We didn't understand that you didn't have to mix from start to finish perfectly. We were attempting in one single mix to mix an entire 8-minute story, and it would be on your mark, get set, go, you know, cue this tape machine, pull up this levels on this thing, and it just, but I think it's true for most people, your experiments and your mistakes turn out to be where the magic is, where the innovation comes, where for us, like Nikki says, our signature sound of layers and building it like you just, you know, like people build up paint in a way, having more voices and more sound and music and archival audio and field recordings, and you're painting, you know, I think we've both always felt we were making movies, you know, very cinematic radio. We wanted you to see it. And so that's, yeah. But because no one was there to train us and we had to do it, we just made mistakes forever. I mean, we hear the early work and we can just walk you through this mistake, that mistake. But there you go.
I think the other thing that came out of experimentation was we really didn't narrate our work. We didn't come in as an announcer and say, this is what you're going to hear.
No over voice.
And we were trying to, you know, let the people tell their own story. But also that was kind of a mistake too, discovering that we were interviewing this one man who was the world's champion one-armed pool player, one-handed pool player, Ernie Morgan. And we had seen this headline in the newspaper, pool shark in town. And so we had to get down there. And we did this entire interview, and we learned a lot. We just did it live, but there was music in the background, there was a crowd. We didn't want to use all of it, we wanted to move things around. So we realized we had to go back and interview him separately, then, you know, record the jukebox that we loved so much, and the crowd. We got back to the studio and we started putting it together, and our questions were in, like, where did you grow up, and da-da-da. And we started cutting them out, you know, and realized that the crack of a pool ball could make that transition, that we really didn't have to be in there as young women interviewing this, you know, 75-year-old man, which put a whole other layer between the listener and Ernie Morgan. And it just seemed right. And so we started to pull our questions out, which affected how we asked questions, because you have to get a complete answer if you're not going to get in there and tell the, you know, transition material. So.
And early on, did you have a time limit? Or how did you decide? Did you have
On
like an
our own
hour
show.
or?
We had a 2-hour show Tuesday afternoons at the radio station, and then we had done a long interview with the road ranger. Down the hill from Nikki's commune was a KOA, a little convenience store, and she pulled in one day to get milk, and there outside the KOA was this Ford Ranchero pickup truck, and on it said the road ranger, scourge of the tow hook and the long delay, the champion of the stranded traveler. And she went inside the convenience store, and there was a guy in a gray jumpsuit and big belt, champion of the stranded traveler, Stetson hat, aviator shades, buying a Marlboro and a Coke, and Nikki struck up a conversation with him, and it turned out he was a Vietnam vet who came home from the Vietnam War and just was not ready to take off his uniform, still wanted to serve his country. But the way that he now decided to do it was to have this pickup truck, as he said, laden with 700 pounds of vehicle-saving devices. And he would go on patrol on this really windy stretch of road on Highway 17 from San Jose to Santa Cruz for the beach, and people would be running out of gas or overheating or getting flat tires, and he would just patrol for no money. He did it all for free, just rescuing stranded travelers, getting people back on the road. Nikki meets him. We went on the road with him. We went on patrol with him on a hot July 4th weekend. anyway, we put that story, we had hours and hours of tape, we put it on our hour-long, 2-hour show, and a listener heard it and said, you should really cut that down and send it to NPR. And that was before we'd been doing really any cutting. We just did not know how to cut, we didn't know how to mix, but they said, oh yeah, make it like under 10 minutes. I was like, oh, how do we go from 2 hours to under 10 minutes? That's where layering starts coming in, and that's where trying to create scenes come in. So we had this goal, and we sent it to All Things Considered, you know, in the mail with a note with our friend's name, Kim Aubrey, who was instrumental in both of us learning radio, and he knew of NPR and knew the people. And we turned it in, and lo and behold, they aired it, and that was our first piece on the radio.
And what year was this?
81, 80, 81?
81.
So NPR was, all things considered, was still fairly new.
Oh, it was very new. In fact, we didn't have it at our station, or in our area at all.
We'd never heard it.
We'd never heard it. We'd never heard NPR.
The first time we heard NPR, we were up in the Bay Area, and we'd gone up, we were searching for archival audio about World War II, because we were doing a piece called War and Separation, Life on the Home Front During World War II, and we were scouring Stanford Archive of Recorded Sound, old sound engineers from CBS Radio in the war, and we were driving back from a good day at the archives, and you know, it's just joy in the kingdom, and we were driving back and listening to All Things Considered, and they said, oh, I had this horrible headache. And so we'd stopped, and I'd bought Tylenol, and I took 2 Tylenol, and we're driving back, and all of a sudden we're listening to All Things Considered, and on the radio they say, there's a large Tylenol scare, and all of Tylenol is being recalled because there have been 9 fatalities from
And we
Tylenol. I threw the Tylenol out the window. I willed Nikki my microphone in that moment, and we kind of drove back waiting for me to die. It was like,
That was
we
our
were
first
just
NPR
getting started.
experience.
So that was NPR to us, the bearer of bad news. Little did we know.
I loved hearing you talk about the way you think about your work cinematically, and to me, when I listen to your stories, it reminds me of like cinema verite or D.A. Pennebaker, or even like the the naturalistic sound of like Robert Altman movies. And so I was wondering if you know those were influences at the time, and what you were consuming yourselves as listeners and viewers when you were thinking and creating your sound style.
Massive influences for me, I'd say for both of us, whether it was literally, you know, seeing the Maysles brothers, seeing Pennebaker, that kind of film, definitely seeing Robert Altman movies, and that how these interlocking scenes and music that starts in one scene and is the transition point, and then you suddenly pick up another character and you don't even know how you got there, and then there's certain things that are distractions, but then they pull your attention over here. Fellini also, I think, really affected both of us in that there were just these weird ideas and the theatricality of it. I think when Nikki was talking about Ernie Morgan and cutting us out, I think what happened in that moment, and it kind of continues throughout, is they're documentaries, but they're also putting people on stage. They are, in Ernie Morgan's case, it was a one-man show. You were moving through the pool hall with this one man as he shot exhibition pool and told you his life story. You know, sometimes most of the stories have more characters than that. But yeah, those kind of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 also.
And when I met Davia, I had only worked in film before that and was really interested in filmmaking. And so for me, in fact, when I was working on this one little 12-minute film with the Bolex, the part that was the most mysterious to me and challenging was the audio, because I couldn't see it.
She said to me the day we met, she said, yeah, I've made this film, because Nikki had just come back from, was it called a fellowship or an internship?
It was a fellowship.
With the
Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship.
For museums.
In museum education at the Metropolitan Museum.
So, and while she's there, she makes this 12-minute film. And then she says to me when we meet, yeah, I really love making films. The part I really hate is the sound. And I think, really, Rob? Go meet Nikki Silva. She hates sound? Like, what are all these
I
people
didn't hate
thinking?
sound.
No, she
It was
didn't hate
just
sound.
mysterious to me.
She said she hated it.
I did?
Yeah. But anyway, her larger truth triumphed. Yeah.
But even with that film in those early days, it was the idea of asking maybe not the person in charge to give you the tour of the museum. You know, look to the left, look to the right, look to the teller, look to the person that's got the most for the most storytelling ability as your main character.
It's sort of part of what we call stories from the B-side, you know?
And
Not the official person necessarily, but
who has a different way in. And, you know, you can pick up on the main people later, but, you know. Or not.
And so who did you choose?
He was a guard at the museum, and he was very recusy. He's now an artist. He was very muscle-bound and wonderful, and he took us on tours of the catwalks up in the Met and down in the basement, and every lunch hour. And he talked about the visitors. He talked about the artworks and his favorite pieces and what drew him, and he analyzed the visitors. And then on his lunch hour, as we were walking through the hallways here, I noticed it's the same kind of a hallway. Mm-hmm. They were filled with Rodin sculptures in storage. You know, all these people going like this and this. And Ray is walking down this corridor to this little classroom where he has a phonograph set up and a bottle of or a glass of water, and he puts heavy metal music on, and he lifts weights every day in the basement of the Metropolitan Museum. And it was just wonderful, you know, walking through Arms and Armor down to Ray Kuzi doing his exercises.
Can you talk a little bit about how you came by your name, and once you kind of picked up a label, did that sort of solidify what you were doing and how you, I don't want to say how you presented yourself, but how you marketed and grew your contacts?
yeah, from early on, going back to interviewing a lot of older people, my name's Davia Nelson, her name's Nikki Silva. Both of us have kind of challenging names, you know, and people would say Nikki and Sylvania or Davia and, you know, just whatever. Our names were always getting mangled. That was one thing. And then we were preparing for the Tuesday show one day, and now the commune was coming together, this piece of land that this group of people bought, and in it was this old ramshackle house with a ramshackle kitchen. And Nikki and I were preparing for Tuesday's show while cooking a salmon dinner for the commune. And the book that we were going to talk about on the show was called The Sidewalk Companion to Santa Cruz Architecture. Lots of backstory about different buildings in the town. And there was this one story about the Kitchen brothers, Kenneth and Robert Kitchen, who were stonemasons there in the 1940s. They built the chimneys and the fireplaces and the porches, and they built, also they were real eccentrics, and they built yogi temples and goat milk bars, and they quarried by the light of the moon, and they'd bring the rock down in this convertible Packard. And they also started sending and trying to send and receive messages to submarines they thought were lurking in the bay.
During World War II.
During World War II.
As one would,
yes. As one
would.
does. And there were some examples of their architecture on the west side of Santa Cruz, and we got obsessed, and we decided to do sort of ultimately an oral mystery of them. But anyway, as we were cooking, we started calling ourselves the Kitchen Sisters, because we were just destroying this salmon dinner. It was a wreck. And then we got on the radio on Tuesday, and the author of the book came on the show, and we said, please tell the story of the Kitchen brothers, not to be confused with the Kitchen Sisters who are here with you today. And we weren't going to do food stories for another 25 years. I mean, we didn't know we were going to be together for 25 years telling stories, but they weren't the focus of our work. But somehow, just taking this name, the Kitchen Sisters, bringing us, and people would always say, are you two sisters? That was always a question. But the kitchen, it's the room in the house with smells the best, has the best stories. And it was just this, it was branding before there was any branding. We weren't thinking of it in that way. It just felt right. And we just kept going in that direction. It just somehow, and NPR, at that point, two people weren't usually getting credited at all. and I think that's also partly why our style became partly non-narrated, because whose voice was it going to be? And they didn't want two voices, and our instinct was to pull our voices out anyway. But once we gave it the name The Kitchen Sisters, for some reason, they said yes to that too. And it just kept sticking, and people just always, and then the larger idea became the Kitchen Sisterhood. All the people we interviewed, all the stories we were trying to tell, the big series that would involve thousands of people around the nation, you know, trying to build community through storytelling.
So what was your first big series?
First big series is Lost
Or,
and
or,
Found
or did
Sound.
it sort of gradually
Well,
ramp
Route
up from
66.
individual to
Well, there were, so Davia moved up to San Francisco in about 82, I believe. And I stayed in Santa Cruz. So we were working kind of long distance by telephone.
We've only worked together in the same town for 2 years out of 40 years.
Wow, that's interesting.
And there was no digital anything, y'all. There was just...
Not even, yeah, like the fax machine was new kind of thing.
There wasn't a computer, there wasn't
So
any...
how did you do that?
The telephone,
FedEx, telephone and FedEx, and driving hours at a time to play each
There's
other
a lot
things.
more driving.
But we took on the Route 66. We were doing individual stories, but then we started to go into series, and we'd always been driving around our region and going, why is that road called Leveroni Road? And what's up there? And they really need to be audio guides. And then we just started talking about, you know what road really needs an audio guide, an audio tour? A cassette you could go get at a gas station and put it in Chicago and take it out when you get to Santa Monica. Route 66, that needs an audio tour. And let's get AAA to distribute it. And we tried to go down that road. And then we suddenly realized Route 66 was closing. And so we drove the length of the road from Chicago to LA. And that became the first series that was on, All Things Considered ran it every day.
For 5 days.
Yeah.
That was
And then Lost and Found Sound was the biggie, the big kahuna. First
at the
kahuna.
turn of the century.
Yeah, and what year was that? Or when did it done?
1999 was
But
when it started. to air.
we began thinking about it a few years before that, because we had to write grants and we had to think it through, and we had to figure out even what it was to do something for the turn of the century. And that's really when we sort of called in Jay Allison and began to collaborate with him and try to figure out what is this thing we should be doing, because photographers were, you know, doing stories about the turn of the century through images. How could we capture that in sound? And sort of that was the beginning of us thinking about Lost and Found Sound. And when we'd been doing live radio, we also played music on our show. And we also began collecting home recordings, because we'd found one in a bunch of 78s that my dad had in the garage. And this was a 78 that had this letter from this woman to her husband overseas during World War II. And it completely inspired us. It captured the air of the time and the language and the feel and her anxiety. And it was just this, hello, Louis, this is your wife again. And she sings to him. And it just encapsulated this whole era. And we said, what is this? And my mother said, well, I made one of those at the radio station during World War II, and they sent it over to your dad. We have it here, and my dad carried it all over Europe and brought it back, this little red home recording, and we began looking for them in Goodwills and asking people if they had any old home recordings in their stereo consoles, and we began turning them up. And a big story that we did with NPR was War and Separation, where we talked about life on the home front and what that was like during World War II. And we used these records from the soldiers going back to the wives, and the wives going to the soldiers, and news broadcasts, and all this archival audio that we collected.
Which is where the Library of Congress comes in, because we got so obsessed with World War II and with trying to capture this era, life on the home front. So we were just starting to scour any place we could for archival recordings that captured the war. And we started coming here to the Library of Congress and to the National Archives. And back in that era, you could come, we would bring our cassette recorder and RCA jacks, and you could just plug into the back of reel-to-reel tape recorders. There were beautiful card catalogs then, and it would say, Ku Klux Klan sings barbershop quartets. Carmen Miranda, beer commercial, 1948, highest paid woman in the world. On and on, all aspects of history, like 10,000 butcherettes come to work to take over butchering from the men who've gone off to war. And we would just come for days at a time. I just found my National Archives research card from 1980 it'll be coming in here. I'm sure people will want to see it like they want to see Jefferson's books soon.
Definitely.
We would just made multiple pilgrimages here across the years. The other reason I think we knew to come here, the Library of Congress had a series of discs, recordings, songs of childhood, songs of war and peace, songs of work, songs of immigration, and on our Tuesday show on KUSP, we'd be playing a lot of those different recordings. And so it just opened our eyes to what was in these institutions and what we might draw on.
Yeah, these were the Dick Spotswood
These were the
compilations.
Dick Spotswood
Who
compilations.
else influenced you as sound archivists?
I mean, a lot of the Smithsonian kind of recordings, folkways, all that kind of music. I mean, Studs influenced us, but
Studs Terkel?
Studs Terkel. More we were reading Studs than hearing.
Listening, right.
I don't remember hearing Studs
I
till
don't
way
either, but
longer.
we read his
Nikki
books
started
and-
giving me Studs books. I was going through my books that are coming into the Library of Congress and saw that I still have Nikki Studs' books. Like, damn, I never
darn.
returned that. Sorry, Nick. She writes her name in books. But yeah,
Tony Schwartz.
I don't think I knew about
No, we
Tony
didn't,
Schwartz till
but-
way, way later, but he had a massive influence
Of
on
the
us.
records.
I grew up Sing Out magazine and the whole folk music movement. Since I was a little girl, I was given an auto harp, a banjo. Folk music was what I lived for back, this kind of led me into the DJing, which led to protest singing, which led to the Supreme Court. So all that was sort of, old recordings that were blues musicians or Elizabeth Cotton or, all that kind of music was in there too.
But they all have what seems to be common denominators. You have average people or grassroots people telling their own stories.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And by that point, had you grown as an organization? Did you have assistants, or were you working with people, or no?
We had each other. I don't know, I don't think Nikki thinks the same way about this, but in my mind, once I read, did people read Keith Richards' book, A Life? Do you know that book about the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards? And he describes, Nikki is always like out in front, kind of looking ahead, peering around the corner, and she found a shed for us to work in. Once we found each other and started doing, and her job at the museum got destroyed by one of the tax initiatives, so she really took on the Kitchen Sisters and shoring us up. And so we had this shed, and we just holed up in that shed for 2 years, bought a reel-to-reel player, taught ourselves to cut, had to fundraise a good 90% of the time, probably 10% time getting to do the radio, 90% fundraising. But when I read the book about Mick and Keith and them being teenagers and being in a shed for years and years and just woodshedding, just practicing together until they figured it out, I thought, yeah, we weren't quite the Rolling Stones, but we were in a shed.
We were in a shed. Yeah,
We
that's
just
true.
wouldn't come out.
And I think too, grant writing, we can't say enough about it because it's I know it was a real hardship, but it was a real gift too because listen to me.
We don't always think the same.
Right. No, because it made us, articulate what it was we were thinking. And when I read back on these grants, which you'll have in your collection, a lot of it came true. I mean, the things that we planned and we thought, maybe not the exact stories we pitched, but the essence, the heart, the spirit of what it was that we were trying to get at. A lot of what you're saying of, everyday people just telling their stories and talking about their lives and how that was going to illustrate the bigger issues in the world. All of that's in those grants.
And who was funding you in the?
Well, the very first grant we got was from the California Council for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts. Those two. There was like a $3,000 grant or something from the NEA that they would give to individual artists. And then CCH, it was harder because you had to have a sponsoring organization to go with you to the NEA and the NEH.
And there were these radio grants starting to appear,
CPB.
Satellite Program Development Fund, CPB. A lot of our funding came, the bigger things for the bigger projects, Lost and Found Sound,
And
NEA, CPB,
At the
NEH.
Lost and Found Sound point, we realized, well, maybe we need to be a nonprofit because we need to be able to just go for it instead of trying to convince another agency that they need to go for it with us. And that's, I think, what really spurred us to look into that idea. And that was about 2001, I think, as Lost and Found Sound was gaining traction and there was more and more interest in that project.
Can I go back just
of course.
before I forget one thing? When you were saying everyday people, working people, unknown, unsung people, yes, for sure, that is the most focus of our work. But I think also, like I'm thinking about Route 66 and how we interviewed Mickey Mantle for that story, and we interviewed Bobby Troop, who wrote Get Your Kicks on Route 66, and different prominent people. We were looking for people who either had a seminal role in creating the road or chronicling the road or making songs, but also who grew up along the road. And that juxtaposition of Mickey Mantle and then someone just at the Wigwam Hotel in, down the road, like the famous and the unsung together is often something that we've really liked to also, the iconic and the little known and the underrepresented.
And one of the things that does also, besides being interesting, is it draws an audience to your piece. It's the thing you can say that is going to get it listened to, is going to get the station to pick it up, is going to get the listener to pay attention. So, George Foreman and these
So
people.
they're the hooks.
The little hook, yeah, the hooks.
Interesting.
Well, and also stories from the B-side. We're always looking for the hidden histories, for the people on the edges and the margins. And so if George Foreman's going to be in a story, he's going to be telling you about things. He's not going to be talking about his boxing career. He's going to be talking to you about hunger and growing up poor and learning about that the George Foreman Grill is the way many homeless people and new immigrants with no kitchens are surviving. So it's always looking for that other angle. Mickey Mantle, the story of him growing up on Route 66, those kinds of things.
We also hear from listeners a lot in your stories, and I was wondering when you started doing the hotline and playing messages.
That was
Yes.
Lost and Found Sound is when we started doing that. And that with Jay Allison, we decided to just ask, just say it out loud, ask people, tell them what we were doing. And especially at turn of the century, it just seemed this moment to look and listen. And also we didn't know everything that was out there. And it was sort of like a wonderful, treasure hunt. And so Jay took on the role of our curator of the quest for sound. And we opened up a phone line on NPR. And we did the first story in the series was a number of stories that kind of gave people the idea of what it was we were trying to do, that we weren't trying to do actual promotion of restaurants or anything, or not, I'm hidden kitchens is what I'm thinking, but Lost and Found Sound, we weren't talking about really famous things and recordings, but more home recordings and things that meant something in someone's personal life. Jay put out the quest and we got, how many?
Thousands.
Thousands of callers. And this was before.
The other thing about the phone line, sorry,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing about opening up a phone line, it gives you an amazing point of departure in a story. You suddenly have someone telling you a short story and urging you, and it was true in Lost and Found Sound, it's true in Hidden Kitchens, Hidden World of Girls, all the different projects that we open up the phone line for. It gives you this way to launch a story. It's somewhat, and usually people feel the sense of urgency. With Lost and Found Sound, we were saying vanishing voices, sound on the verge of extinction, endangered sounds, sonic pioneers, and people knew with the millennium coming, with the new century coming, and the whole medium was changing so much. So people had that sense of urgency and that we had to chronicle these things or they had to be preserved. Same with Hidden Kitchens. It was like the old ways, the old world was disappearing. A lot of land was getting covered, old peach trees, old eating traditions, communities were getting broken up. We used to say these aren't phone messages, they're emergency things that want us to do house calls. You know, they were like, send the ambulance, the peach tree's coming down and you need to chronicle the da-da. You know, so they served so many things and they brought thousands of people into the public radio storytelling process. And sometimes those people who called in and we took them up on the story would then come pick us up when we flew to Kentucky for the story of Burgoo that came in on a message. They would be the person who picked us up at the airport and then stayed with us for 2-3 days as we chronicled the event. And
actually became co-producers. That was Nancy Penrod in Burgoo, picks us up and she's got a great voice. She becomes the through line. You know, she's taking us to Pius X church and we're watching the Burgoo being made at midnight and she's telling us all about it. So she becomes the voice, the producer, the co-producer.
A lot of people who called in, and then the other, if Nikki's using that term of co-producers, so many people in the public radio system have produced and collaborated. Terry Tempest Williams, the writer, has that great line, collaboration is the only way forward. And I just think we begin as a collaboration. It's been two of us doing this work for 4 decades together. And then we're always reaching out to our other colleagues in the public radio system, like Nikki says, Jay Allison is curator of the Quest in the Sonic Memorial Project and in Hidden Kitchens. Joe Richmond, whose Radio Diaries collaborated with us. Jamie York will be playing Walking High Steel. Anyway, dozens of our colleagues have produced and co-produced radio stories with us. Barrett Golding, the list is long.
Do you have any idea how many programs, episodes you've produced over the years?
I made a list of all of it to put into the file, but I never counted it. The list goes on for about 15 pages. It's by the hundreds and hundreds. We think we have about 7,000 hours of recordings that are coming into the collection.
Because each of those stories has about 20, 30 hours of raw recordings that go along with it, as well as all of the material, the archival material that we gathered, and the sound, the raw sound from natural sound from outside the ambience.
One of my favorite things in the archive is a photo that Nikki took of some of our cassettes that say crickets, ocean, chickens.
Sprinklers.
That's sprinklers. Because we were always, as we're recording people, we've been always trying to capture the American soundscape, the changing, especially I think that came a lot from Lost and Found Sound. Like, if we didn't record it, like let's say we're trying to capture the sound of transportation, if we didn't go record it that week, a human voice had been replaced by a digital voice. Transition was happening so fast, as were old rainbird sprinklers, they were disappearing, as were the amount of bugs that were in the American naturescape, exactly. So bird song, things that gave you a feeling of place that we put in as underbed as well, so that you'd know, again, cinematic, but also evoking time and place.
One other transition that happened for us at that moment of Lost and Found Sound is we went from analog to digital. So that was
was that
was a big.
How difficult was that?
Difficult. It was difficult.
I'd hand it to
Yeah.
Nikki Silva.
Yeah,
I
it
never
was.
made the transition.
Oh, you did? So you still do analog?
No. In my mind, I still do analog. I never learned Pro Tools. Nikki took on Pro Tools. I am
But it's-
just slightly dyslexic, so I can't track lines. So it's, to me, and the editing was always one of my favorite things to do. So it's been a grief thing, but we have a wizard, in-house wizard.
I always felt like reel-to-reel editing was kind of like knitting or something you did with your
Yeah, you
hands.
just- yeah.
The computer is completely different, and it is like one step removed and very.
Did it make your
Electronic.
life easier? I mean, there's just an awful lot.
100%.
Well, yeah. When I think about, and also,
You didn't have to drive 2.5 hours to listen to the next cut. But it also makes it much less intimate, too.
right. No, it's different.
But
definitely.
But you can experiment so much more.
Yeah, you can say quickly, does this work underneath this scene, or should we do something else? Boom, boom, change, before we'd have to go find it on some other reel and bring it in and, do all kinds of fancy footwork. And we didn't really, except for that very early stuff that we were doing for the radio show, we mixed our own things. But later, as we went, we were having things mixed by other people, and we still do work with Jim McKee, who does our sound design at the very end. When we've kind of come together with our program, have it all edited, we go with Jim, and he does the magic sound.
And so he's mastering.
He does, he does the mastering.
I'm going to say his name again.
Jim
McKee.
Earwax Productions.
And where is he?
He's across the hall from us on the 6th floor of American Zoetrope, where our San Francisco offices are. But he's had different locations for years. We've all been nomadic for all these years.
He's
but
been
now
working
it's-
with us since Lost and Found Sound, and even before.
Before that, no, I mixed about.
I also want to
mixed
say
Carmen
that
Miranda.
we do have 2 people now working with us, and we've had people
Yeah, can you
throughout.
just tell us a little bit about who and how you found them? So who's working with you now?
Brandy Howell and Nathan Dalton are the 2.
All hail.
Yes. And Nathan does all of they're both producers, as well as doing all of this other stuff, research and office work, and just all the stuff that goes along with everything. They are both producers in their own right and work on productions, every aspect of producing with us, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Brandy Howell Nathan's also a musician, and Brandy's a great researcher.
And in years past, who have you worked with? Have there been
The
long
first person that we hired was this incredible woman friend also. She had worked with Mary Ellen Mark, the incredible photographer, and she was moving to California. And I received a fax one day from a friend who said, I know this young woman, and whoever hires her will be really lucky. And we were just starting the Lost and Found Sound project. And I looked at it and I said, God, whoever hires her is going to be lucky. And kept staring at it. And then I said, I'm going to hire her. That's who's going to be lucky. And she came and worked with us for the Lost and Found Sound series and a hunk of the Sonic Memorial. And she then opened up that position because our projects were getting bigger and bigger and of nationwide scope. And she had already worked with Mary Ellen, so she had all these systems that she then kind of shared with us that got us even a way to think about scaling up the work.
And Laura Folger, who's an incredible photographer and
Graphic designer.
As we moved into Lost and Found Sound, we wanted visuals, we wanted postcards, we wanted imagery. This was even before you needed that stuff for online, but we did create a website. It was one of the very, very early websites for
NPR thought we were nuts.
NPR.
They would not have anything to do with a website. It was like, really, trust us. You're going to want this one day.
But luckily, Laura, with her graphic design skills, was really able to produce so many. And then we'd go out on tour and we'd be talking to groups, and she made these big blow-up posters of the different people that were being interviewed, and she'd advertising the show, and yeah, it was a real dog and pony show. We'd pull out with things, and we'd be taping things up. And
That's great. We could go on for hours and hours, and we will have you back again to do later stuff. But what haven't I asked? What do you think it's important for us to know, or Jesse, what haven't I asked?
Maybe just to hear a little bit more about the later series, like Hidden World of Girls and The Keepers. You know, how did you decide to follow archivists and librarians?
You know, we had done the Lost and Found Sound series, and we had, as we said, we've always relied on the kindness of archivists. We did that series, and archivists and librarians across the nation opened up their collections to us and told us about the most remarkable things they had in it. And we were suddenly part of this underground, sort of these people that we thought they are heroes, they're unsung heroes of the nation. They are the stewards of American history, and they were often a kind of, or so we thought, more quiet, soft-spoken people, not out on the front lines. They were, but doing this phenomenal work. So after Lost and Found Sound, our next project was going to be called We've Always Relied on the Kindness of Archivists, and we were going to feature archivists and librarians throughout the nation. 9/11 happened, and we veered in the direction of doing the Sonic Memorial Project instead. We were at the end of the Hidden World of Girls and the project The Making of, what people make in the Bay Area and why, and starting a new project. It was 2018 or so. We were just jamming, like, what is it? And Nathan, who we work with, said, we've always relied on the kindness of archivists. And we thought, yes, it was just that time, 2016, 17, 18, where truth and facts and archival truths were suddenly being rocked and questioned and upended, and the archivists and the librarians were rising up, and they were going into right there at the front lines to preserve truth, to preserve democracy, to fight banned books, to open up the nation's history and truths and documents. And so we changed it from We've Always Relied on the Kindness of Archivists to The Keepers. And that little tagline is activists, archivists, rogue librarians, curators, collectors, and historians, keepers of the culture, guardians of the history, large and small, protectors of the freedom of information and ideas. And that moved into the one that continues to this day, because look at the role of archivists.
It's also a really interesting time, I think, in terms of museums and archives, and just those questions were fascinating, like who is telling history, who is collecting, what gets told, and how does it get told. All of those questions were perfect for storytelling and sort of added an edge to everything that was percolating in our minds.
And now your collection will be kept at the Library of Congress.
Yay.
Full circle.
So we're so honored. I will start crying if I was to say what it means to us, but to have everything come full circle, to be two young women in our early 20s here with a cassette, using the card catalog, and it's shaping our work and our entire kind of ethos and focus, and then to have our collection go into the public domain and be available to people in that same way that all this work was available to us, all this history is such an honor. Thank you so much.
It's our honor as well.
Yeah.
We're delighted to have you here. Thank you. Thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you.